Hello, I'm Chitra. I teach English at Silver Hills Public School. This session is on Indigo, which is a chapter of Flamingo, the NCERT textbook prescribed for Class 12 English. Indigo, as we know, is a color that's placed between violet and blue in the spectrum of the rainbow. Indigo is more blue than violet, and it is a color that people all over the world have fallen madly in love with. Now, our quest for that perfect shade of indigo would lead us to the indigo plant, a plant that is extensively cultivated all over the world, also in the central and northern plains of India. Indigo dye can be extracted from the indigo plant. In the 19th century, the British traders discovered the commercial viability of the indigo plant thanks to the indigo dye, and they could find a huge market in the Western world for indigo produced in India. Consequently, indigo plantations sprung up all over the plains of central and northeastern India. Incidentally, indigo is also a word closely associated with the freedom movement of India. This may sound absurd or strange to some of you at least, but in reality, it was Gandhi's casual visit to a nondescript village in Bihar, famous for its indigo plantations, Champaran, that quickened the pace of the freedom movement in India. This chapter, this lesson, indigo, is that leaf taken out of Gandhi's life story. Therefore, indigo falls into the category of biographies. Indigo is an extract from Louis Fisher's biography of Gandhi, The Life of Mahatma Gandhi. This is considered to be one of the most authentic works written on Gandhi. Louis Fisher, American essayist, started his career with the New York Times and other media houses in the United States. He gained international acclaim with The Life of Mahatma Gandhi, which is also the source of the Academy Award-winning movie Gandhi. Well, that sums up the fact file and the introduction to Indigo. The narrative is so aligned that it accommodates both first-person and third-person narration with ease, which again reflects the craft of the writer. Indigo opens with Gandhi's words, "I will tell you how it happened that I decided to urge the departure of the British." Thereafter, Gandhi recalls how he was a delegate at the annual convention of the Indian National Congress held in Lucknow in the year 1916. That is when a poor peasant approaches Gandhi. A poor peasant, just like any other peasant in India, poor and emaciated. Now, why did the peasant approach Gandhi, and what did he tell Gandhi? "I'm Rajkumar Shukla, I'm from Champaran, and I want you to come to my district." Now, this is again a thought-provoking image of a poor peasant in India walking up to a leader of international acclaim, asking him to visit his district. This is undoubtedly because of Gandhi's simplicity and his unassuming humility, because of which Rajkumar Shukla could actually muster courage and confidence to approach Gandhi. Hereafter, we find Rajkumar Shukla accompanying Gandhi wherever he went. We know that Gandhi is a very popular leader and he had a lot of engagements and commitments. Rajkumar Shukla follows Gandhi all over India. Wherever Gandhi travelled, Shukla followed. Finally, when Gandhi reaches his ashram in central India, he is so impressed by Rajkumar Shukla, the poor sharecropper's tenacity. Yes, his tenacity, his sheer determination, and his story that he agrees to go to Champaran. He asks Shukla to fix a date and accompany him to Champaran from Calcutta. Now, Gandhi's arrival in Champaran and his journey to Champaran is also a thrilling episode that shows the popularity of the leader and his sense of responsibility and commitment. As the train stops at several stations, Gandhi is greeted by crowds of people, and he particularly remembers the services offered by Professors Malkani and Kriplani, even risking their government jobs. Gandhi also observes that in smaller localities, people were quite afraid to show their sympathy for advocates of home rule because of the fear of the British authorities. Gandhi reaches Champaran via Muzaffarpur and Motihari, and as he reaches Motihari, which is the district headquarters of Champaran, he is again greeted by thousands of peasants. They had come to take a look at their champion. There, Gandhi also meets the lawyers. Now, the lawyers play a very important role in this part of the text. There are instances throughout the text that tell us how Gandhi could actually inspire the lawyers. The lawyers here inform Gandhi about the sharecropping arrangement in Champaran, and they also tell him about the fee they collected from the peasants for representing them in the courts. Gandhi immediately chides them, scolds them for collecting money from the poor peasants, and observes that as long as the peasants are fear-stricken, it is pointless and futile to go to the law courts. The lawyers give a brief description about the sharecropping arrangement in Champaran. Most of the arable land in Champaran was divided into large estates owned by landlords, definitely, and worked by Indian peasants. The chief commercial crop was indigo, and the peasants were not actually ready to cultivate indigo because it was a tiresome procedure. They did not want to cultivate indigo at all. On the other hand, the landlords now understood the viability of indigo as a commercial crop because, as we've discussed earlier, it had a huge market in the Western world. They forced the peasants to cultivate 15% of their holding, to cultivate indigo in 15% of their holdings, although the peasants were reluctant to do so. But the peasants could not escape because there was a long-term agreement that bound them to this. The landlords continued to oppress the peasants, and later on, since this is the period of the First World War, a new development happens with regard to indigo. Germany produced synthetic indigo. And as we know, when there is a synthetic counterpart in the market, the price of the natural product would go down. Similarly, the price of natural indigo fell, and the landlords quickly assessed the situation. They understood that it would no longer be profitable to cultivate indigo. They thought of a possibility of extracting more money out of the peasants. The peasants did not want to cultivate indigo in the first place. It was irksome to them, it was burdensome to them. They were always looking for means to escape from the long-term agreement. Here, the British landlords found their opportunity. Since the peasants were ignorant, uneducated people, they were kept in the dark regarding the new development. And the peasants were told to pay a compensation if they wanted to be free from the indigo sharecropping agreement. Many peasants willingly agreed and paid the money. Gradually, things became known to them. They understood that they've been cheated or tricked by the British landlords. That is when they hired lawyers demanding the money back. When the peasants, the sharecroppers, hired lawyers, the British landlords hired thugs. Naturally, a conflict followed, and it is at this point that Gandhi arrived in Champaran. So much about the history of the sharecropping arrangement in Bihar, especially with regard to indigo cultivation, and we notice how oppressive it is and how the peasants or the sharecroppers were burdened by it. Now, sharecropping again is a technical term, and what does it mean? Sharecroppers are those farmers who are called tenant farmers. They do not have any land of their own, so they have to make use of the land of the landlord. That is why it is an oppressive system, and that is why Rajkumar Shukla approached Gandhi. He travelled all the way from Bihar to meet Gandhi in Lucknow. Back to Champaran now. Gandhi is in Champaran and he starts acting. He starts by collecting facts. He meets quite a few officials, government officials, and British landlords to look into the matter. As Gandhi starts working, the Britishers understand that it would not be favorable to them. That is when they ask Gandhi to leave Champaran. When Gandhi wouldn't agree, they used force. One day, Gandhi receives a written notice asking him to leave Champaran. And how does Gandhi react? He signed a receipt for the notice and wrote on it that he would disobey the order. Now, this is a turning point in Gandhi's life and also in the course of India's freedom struggle. How is it so? What exactly is Gandhi doing here? By signing, by accepting the notice and writing on it that he would disobey the order. Yes, he was launching civil disobedience here. Civil disobedience, as we all know, is a movement, a non-violent movement launched by Gandhi to counter armed struggle. So here, for the first time, Gandhi got a chance to test the potency, the viability of civil disobedience in fighting the Britishers. And he used it. That is why it is called a turning point in Gandhi's life and also in India's struggle for independence. How was it so? It was after his success in Champaran that Gandhi used this civil disobedience as a tool all over India, which again further accelerated the pace of the freedom movement. So this part of the text talks about that turning point in Gandhi's life and also in India's history. Gandhi was asked to come to court the next day. He receives a summons, and summons again is a technical word. He was asked to come to the court to appear before the magistrate the next day. And that night was a busy night for Gandhi. He drafts a lot of messages to people, including the people in his ashram in central India. So from this we understand that nothing escapes his attention and he has an eye for detail. Throughout the night, he works systematically and meticulously. The morning saw the town of Motihari black with peasants. And as Gandhi had predicted, the fear in them, the fear of the authorities, was at least partially wiped off their minds. That is why they came in huge numbers to see their champion and also to show their support. Inside the court, Gandhi uses his expertise as a lawyer and the magistrate is quite baffled. The authorities in Champaran, the British authorities, the officials, are quite confused and troubled regarding the course of action to be taken. And Gandhi pleads guilty. It is at this point that he uses these words, conflict of duties. He tells the court that he is involved in a conflict of duties. On the one hand, not to set a bad example as a lawbreaker, and on the other hand, to render the humanitarian and national service for which he had come. He explained that he was not obeying the law, not because he did not respect it. It was because he was listening to the voice of his higher being, the voice of his conscience, and that involved seeking justice for the poor sharecroppers. The magistrate and the officials did not know what to do. They sought time, obviously, to consult higher authorities, and Gandhi protested against the delay. Meanwhile, since Gandhi had sent for the group of lawyers, they had reached the court and he discusses things with them. Here, this is one instance wherein again we understand how Gandhi leads through examples. The lawyers here are prominent lawyers of Bihar, including Rajendra Prasad, who would later become the president of the Indian National Congress and also of Free India. Rajendra Prasad, Maulana Mazharul Haq, and Brij Kishore Babu were some of the lawyers who visited Gandhi then. Gandhi just asked them two questions. The first one, what would they do if he was sentenced to prison? We understand that Gandhi could be sentenced to prison, he could be sent to jail for civil disobedience, for disobeying the law, for refusing to follow the laws of the land. So he asked this first question, what would you do if I am sent to prison? To which they give a very direct reply. They say they'd come to help Gandhi, to advise Gandhi, and if he is sent to prison, they would all go back. That is when he asked the second question that changes their mind. He asked them, then what about the injustice to the sharecroppers? Now that sets them thinking. This question poses as an eye-opener. The lawyers consult, they hold discussions among themselves, and we see how they come up with a conclusion. They conclude that Gandhi is ready to go to jail in spite of being almost a total stranger in Champaran. He had been in Champaran only for a few weeks. In spite of that, he is ready to go to jail for the sake of the sharecroppers. So what more is expected of them, the lawyers who had a long association with the sharecroppers? The lawyers had represented the sharecroppers in court and they all belonged to the state of Bihar. They understand their duty, their responsibility towards their brethren. And this is how Gandhi changes their attitude. That is when they go back to Gandhi and tells him that they are ready to go to jail with him, that they are ready to court arrest. So this again shows, or this episode is an indicator of how Gandhi leads by example and how he is able to totally fully transform the lawyers. Several days later, Gandhi receives a written communication stating that the case against him has been dropped. Now Gandhi is back in action. He continues with the work, or he resumes the work that he'd started in Champaran. And what is the nature of the work? To collect evidence against the landlords. For that, he met thousands of peasants, but now with the wholehearted support of the lawyers, they meet thousands of peasants and collect data, collect documents, and find out more about the oppressive system in Bihar. When the lawyers change their mind about the peasants, when they realize that they are fellow men and they need to be helped, that is when Gandhi makes the statement, the battle of Champaran is won. Later, when the case against him is dropped, that is when he realizes that civil disobedience had triumphed the first time in modern India. We've already discussed how this incident proves to be a turning point in Gandhi's life and also in the course of India's freedom movement. As Gandhi starts working with the lawyers, he manages to collect a great deal of evidence against the landlords. Because of their concerted efforts, Gandhi is summoned by Sir Edward Gate, who is the Lieutenant Governor of Bihar province at the time. Gandhi has 4 protracted meetings with the Lieutenant Governor, Sir Edward Gate, and as a result of that, a commission was set up to look into the sharecropping arrangement in Bihar and to find out the flaws and solutions. Now, this commission consisted of landlords, government officials, and Gandhi as the sole representative of the peasants. But Gandhi was undeterred because he had done his homework. Consequently, as was expected, the commission could find a crushing mountain of evidence against the landlords, and the only way out for the landlords was to pay a refund. The landlords now were asked to pay the money that they had deceitfully extorted from the peasants. Here, Gandhi quite readily agrees to 25% settlement. Now, why is it so? He could have demanded a full 100% settlement, but in spite of that, he just asked for 25%. What would be the reason? We again understand that Gandhi is not content with huge economic solutions. Here, by agreeing to a 25% settlement, he was also teaching the peasant a lesson in courage. Gandhi believed that the money was not as important as the fact that the Britishers were also surrendering a part of their prestige along with the money. And when the sharecroppers saw that, they learned that they too had rights. Fear of authority was totally fully wiped off their minds. They understood that they too had rights and defenders. The peasant learned courage. And that was the outcome Gandhi wanted out of the Champaran struggle. Indigo sharecropping disappeared in Champaran in course of time. The peasants could get their land back. And that is how indigo sharecropping disappeared, and events justified Gandhi's views and Gandhi's actions. Now, during the time he spent in Champaran, we are made to understand that he spends an uninterrupted period of 7 months. 7 months in Champaran. That again talks about his simplicity and his sheer determination, his sense of responsibility. He couldn't help noticing the poor living conditions of the people. He understood, he observed that education and health care were primary concerns. He appealed for doctors and teachers. He had volunteers coming to Bihar from his ashram. Volunteers, including his family members like his wife and his sons, they helped in reconstructing the Champaran villages. Health centers were set up, and so were primary schools. So from this we understand again that Gandhi seeks cultural, social solutions and not just monetary solutions. As the narrative draws to a close, we understand how the lawyers were taught a lesson in self-reliance through Rajendra Prasad's words. Rajendra Prasad recounts how Gandhi taught the lawyers a lesson in self-reliance. During the Champaran struggle, Charles Fr Andrews, an English pacifist, visited Gandhi. He was about to travel to Fiji Islands, but he was willing to stay back if Gandhi agreed. Now, the lawyers saw this as an opportunity. They thought that since it is an unequal fight, it would be nice if Charles Fr Andrews could stay back and help them. Gandhi quickly read their minds. He was vehemently opposed to the idea. He told them not to seek a prop in Charles Fr Andrews. And Rajendra Prasad recalls gratefully how Gandhi was teaching them a lesson in self-reliance when he told them that the cause is just and they have to rely on themselves to win the battle. This is the third and final instance with the lawyers, how Gandhi teaches them a lesson in self-reliance. As we reach the end of the lesson, we are also made aware of Gandhi, those qualities, those extraordinary qualities and traits that make Gandhi the leader. Gandhi never contented himself with small economic solutions. We've already discussed that. His politics was intertwined with the day-to-day problems of the millions. His is not a loyalty to abstractions, it's a loyalty to living human beings. And that is how self-reliance, Indian independence, and help to sharecroppers are all bound together. We now proceed to the textual questions based on the chapter. The first question under understanding the text: why do you think Gandhi considered the Champaran episode to be a turning point in his life? Here we understand that there is a slight digression in the narrative when civil disobedience is launched by Gandhi and how it is a very significant development in the history of our country and also a turning point in Gandhi's life. When Gandhi was asked to leave Champaran, he accepts the notice and says that he would disobey the law. Here he was launching civil disobedience as a tool against armed struggle. Now, when Gandhi was launching civil disobedience in Champaran, he was also testing the potency of that tool. Based on ahimsa and non-violence, it was a perfect tool for him. Later on, when he wins the Champaran struggle and when civil disobedience triumphed for the first time in modern India, that is when he understands the strength of this movement so that he could use it confidently elsewhere in India. He could follow this practice of civil disobedience, and that is exactly why the Champaran struggle is a turning point in Gandhi's life and also in India's history of freedom struggle. The second question, how was Gandhi able to influence lawyers? Give instances. This also we had discussed quite elaborately. There are 3 instances provided by the text to show how Gandhi influenced the lawyers. The first one, as the lawyers tell him about the fee, the huge fee that they collected from the peasants, what is Gandhi's reaction? He chides them, he scolds them for collecting huge fee from the peasants because he fully empathizes with the peasants, he understands their plight. Secondly, the 2 questions that he asked the lawyers. When the lawyers come to help him when he is about to be imprisoned for launching civil disobedience, that is when he asks these 2 questions. The first one, what would they do if he is sentenced to prison? To which they answer, they would go back to their jobs. That is when he asks the second question, what about the injustice to the sharecroppers? This question poses as an eye-opener to the lawyers and they are able to understand the severity of the oppression faced by the peasants and look at it from a humanitarian perspective. They change their minds, they are fully transformed and they inform Gandhi of their willingness to follow him to jail. And thirdly, the Charles Freer Andrews episode. How the English pacifist Charles Freer Andrews was willing to help Gandhi and the lawyers in Champaran and how Gandhi vehemently opposed that idea. Gandhi reminds the lawyers that although it is an unequal fight, the cause is just and they must rely on themselves to win the battle. They should never seek a prop in Charles Andrews just because he happens to be an Englishman. So, Gandhi was teaching them a lesson in self-reliance. These are the 3 instances provided by the text to show how Gandhi influenced the lawyers. And the third question, what was the attitude of the average Indian in smaller localities towards advocates of home rule? Gandhi, as he is travelling to Champaran, we've seen how he was greeted by huge crowds of people, especially students and teachers and other officials in small towns. There, he notices or he observes that people in smaller localities, maybe in villages and small towns, were quite reluctant to openly show their allegiance to advocates of home rule. Now, advocates of home rule simply means freedom fighters like Gandhi. And what could be the reason? Why is it that people in smaller localities did not openly show their support? It was because of the fear. They feared the Britishers. And with this, we come to the end of understanding the text questions. Now, this is Indigo in a nutshell. Thank you for watching this video.